but the second is the real routine. And we are very happy to have this second Tuesday topical seminar, which is organized by the Faculty of Journalism, in order to discuss interesting questions which attract well-known, respected, distinguished scholars, and which in some cases is responded by some scholars from Russia. This is a way how we try to bridge the gap between the global academia and the Russian media studies, though we don't feel that there is some kind of gaps, but still the times of pandemic are not very easy. We are losing the connections to each other. So we hope these online seminars would be a temporary, but maybe a permanent form of communication between scholars. Today, we have a topical seminar in which we invited distinguished speakers, and the first speaker is Нико Карпентьер, who is representing Charles University. Actually, Nikko, many of us know Nikko for decades, I would say. He's still that young as he was when we got acquainted, but he's much more mature in research, and he's very, I would say, he's very unexpected in his academic interests. Today we have a very I would say innovative presentation, which is called Art-Based Research in Communication and Media Studies. Though Nikko is really very close friend for many of us, he's well known as an extraordinary professor in Charles University, Prague, Czech Republic, and the president of the International Association for Media and Communication Research. He holds also a position in Brussels, in Free University of Brussels, as associate professor, and he's research fellow at Loughborough University, United Kingdom. Before I invite Nikko to start, I would like to say a lot of thanks to my colleague Anna Gladkova, doctor and leading researcher at Moscow State University, who in this her capacity is represented by distinguished organizing and administrative skills. So Anna is a very important person to make the first, second, and I hope other topical seminars a reality. Thank you, Anna, before we start discussion, and I pass the word to Nikko. We plan that each speaker uses 15 minutes to present his ideas, and we don't ask questions after the first talk, but we start discussion in voice and in letters in the chat box after the second speech. So please, Nikko, the time is yours, and I will show you 2 minutes left by my hands. Please.
Thank you, Elena, and also thank you, Anna, for a very kind introduction. And also thanks to Leif for pointing out that I will never age. I'm not too sure about that, but that's another discussion. If you'll oblige me, I would like to share my screen so that we can have some visual support. And this should be fine for you. In case of doubt, this is where you are. So if you want to run away because you're in the wrong place, this is a seminar with both Denis and me. I added a little subtitle to my talk, a series of examples and experiences, because I think that captures quite nicely what I would like to talk about here. And again, with my sincere gratitude for providing me with the platform to have this chat with you, not only to you, but also with you. And I'm very much looking forward to hearing some of your perspectives on this. Every story has its point of origin. And I think in my case, a lot of the work that I've been doing on arts-based research finds its origins in this book, which is called The Discursive Material Knot. It's a research project on Cyprus, more particular on Cypriot community media and conflict transformation. When the book was finished, I was left with this rather awkward question, what to do next. What academics then usually do is that they go for talks, sort of run around the world talking about the book, talking to people that want to hear about the book, talking to people that absolutely don't want to hear about the book. We usually actually communicate in very academic ways about our publications. And for me, at that point, the question rose, how can I do this differently? And of course, I still talked about the book and I still did my presentations. There were follow-up articles. But what we did at the same time was to work together with the community media organizations to find other ways of communicating about the knowledge that we produced with this book. And that became Respublika. Respublika was a community media arts festival that was organized together with these community media associations, not to talk so much about the book itself, but to talk about the ideas within the book. What you see on one side is the poster, that's how it all began. What you see on the other side, the Respublika experiments in the performance of participation and democracy, is the catalog of that exhibition and actually sort of the closing publication of that project. What was important though is that we started using artistic repertoires to start talking about the knowledge that was collected in the project, and that actually brought us to thinking about how important community media are for both democracy and more particular participation. Now, this project got totally out of control. We started organizing a solo exhibition of a duo of digital activist artists, Jotem Wachter, that's what you see in the top screen. We organized a second exhibition, which was called Participation Matters, with 18 art projects. We had 17 festival events, there are seminar series. So every gray hair you see on my head probably came out of that experience of organizing these events, because it was incredibly challenging to do so. One of the interesting opportunities for me is that I could use Participation Matters, one of the main exhibitions, to start experimenting with the combination of democratic theory and installation art. And this became an installation which is called Mirror Palace of Democracy, where in the basement of the Art Center, people could actually go into this installation and be exposed to a cacophonic combination of ideological projects, where each of these voices try to hail the visitor to be convinced by their ideological project, actually communicating that democracy is the combination of these ideologies that are actually contradictory at the same time, and that model of democratic contingency is actually what makes democracy democracy. But as an experiment, it was for me quite interesting, and the fun part, of course, is that I had to work with carpenters, and having the name Carpentier made it really exciting to build things in the basement of the art gallery. But it was for me, I think, a very important experiment in trying to translate my theoretical work into an actual installation, art installation. Now, the Cypriot project also produced a second sub-project, because working in Cyprus, working on conflict transformation, necessitates deep knowledge of the context of the Cyprus problem. There's no escape to understanding decades, even centuries of history. You cannot understand conflict transformation if you don't understand the Cyprus problem. And so my entry point into finding out what could be done to better understand this historical context were the memorials. that you will find everywhere on Cyprus. And I started using photography first to document them, but later to actually start reflecting on their hegemonic representation of antagonistic nationalism and how they were deeply connected to the project. That became a series of exhibitions, the Iconoclastic Controversies exhibitions, and that was then transformed into this book, which is a photographic inquiry into antagonistic nationalism, which combines written text with photographic work. The good news for me is that this book should come out next month, published with Intellect, so I'm actually very, very keen on getting my hands on this myself, but so far it only exists in digital form. The third example, and the last example I want to mention is the Silencing, Unsilencing Nature project, which is connected to a project on environmental communication, where we started thinking about how humans tend to dominate nature and tend to silence it, and we're looking for strategies of unsilencing nature. And that became a whole series of sub-projects, originally invited by a Czech magazine, photography magazine. I started producing a series of wolf collage, which were on the one hand ridiculing them, the cat face digital editions, but also that was allowing these wolves to ask very fundamental theoretical questions. That was then developed into an educational package that was used by groups of youngsters in Sweden to produce photography exhibitions themselves. Some of that material was then included in different exhibitions in Sweden. And finally, for the last phase of the project, we're doing what is called the Wolf Talks project, where we actually produce voices with voice actors that talk about the questions that these wolves raise from the perspective of the wolves, moving away from anthropocentric discourses and finding more respectful, ecocentric positions of talking about human-animal relationships. And this is just my last picture I want to show you. This is one of these workshops of silencing, unsilencing nature in Sweden, in the Färgfabriken Arts Center, where a group of youngsters was using this educational package to produce a series of photographs on actually the relationship between plants and weeds, between legitimate plants and illegitimate plants. And we're actually taking the defense of weed, which sounds in English actually quite funny if you put it like that, but let's not go into these wordplays. A lot of the ideas that we collected in working in different teams were then included in this special issue, which is called Arts-Based Research in Communication and Media Studies. That is to be published, released as an open access special issue on the 12th of April, so in a couple of days. This is sort of a sneak preview if you want. But what we were doing there was actually reflect on a number of these projects, but also invite others to reflect on how we can use artistic research and art-based research in combination with communication and media studies work. Now, let me start wrapping up because time is scarce and I shouldn't be talking forever. One important disclaimer: if we talk about academic knowledge production and communication, we should not underestimate the importance of writing. Right? We like writing, we appreciate writing. Writing is actually one of the main ways we perform our academic identities. It's crucial. And whatever I say is driven by the love of books. I might sort of like articles a bit less. I really like books. You have to forgive me for that. But it's driven by a deep respect for the written text and our publication efforts as a way to share academic knowledge. And that is vital. But what we also, I think, need to do is to experiment with ways of moving beyond the written text, not to replace it, but to transcend it, to add, to complement the written text. And a lot of the experiments that I've been involved with are very much part of that. And this is obviously not just me. There are many different areas and approaches that try to move beyond the written text. This is an article, a table from an article published last year and showing these many different approaches that we have, like science communication, knowledge exchange, participatory action research, multimodal academic communication, visual anthropology, visual sociology, and arts-based research as all different ways, paradigms, ways of organizing academic practices to move beyond the written text. What is particular, though, in the case of arts-based research, is that it combines academic knowledge production and communication with artistic repertoires. And this is what sometimes is called the artistic turn in humanities. There's a whole range of recent publications, but actually these discussions go back to the 1970s. There is a whole range of publications that is thinking about how we can integrate artistic and arts-based research into our academic practices. One of the key publications in this field is Patricia Levy's work. Her argument is that arts-based research is a third paradigm next to quantitative and qualitative approaches. I think this is slightly exaggerated, but it does show the importance that this group of authors, part of this artistic turn, have been placing on art-based approaches. What is important to emphasize in art-based research is that it's not a secondary act of communication. The production of artistic products, the creation itself is part of knowledge production. It's not a second step. It is very much integrated into the process of knowledge production itself. So communication and knowledge production are integrated in this approach. I've given you some of my examples. This is a table of contents of Patricia Levy's work, where you'll find many other examples. You'll find poetry, you'll find fiction there, music, dance, theater. You'll find many, many different examples. One of these classic questions in arts-based research when you want to target PhD students, and that's the question, can you dance your PhD? And in some cases, the answer is actually, yes, you can, because that practice, that performance will open up new ways of understanding what you already understood through the research. And to give you one last example before I wrap up, this is another classic example that's often quoted in these discussions. It's Susanne's PhD project at Columbia University, which actually is a philosophical discussion called On Flattening, which uses the comic book format. So it's basically a comic, which is a really interesting case if, in case you want to look deeper into how the comic is used in academic research. Let me wrap up with one simple question. Why does this matter? Why is it important? And my last slide, I would like to give you some of the answers that these experiences and experiments have actually, have actually allowed me to come up with. I think, first of all, what is crucial to understand that when you actually translate academic knowledge in artistic repertoires, you're still generating new knowledge. And this practice, actually knowing by doing, is something that we underestimate, especially in communication and media studies. It hasn't been done too often in our field. Other fields have been experimenting much more with this. But the fact that you can actually produce knowledge through communicating, and that through communicating you actually produce new knowledge, that's quite a precious tool to start experimenting with. The second argument why I think this matters is that it allows us to expand what we see as knowledge. We often look at knowledge from a very rationalist perspective. What art-based research allows us to do is, Patricia Levy might use a different vocabulary. She talks about resonance, right? How knowledge resonates with us. I would even make it more simple. I would argue it allows us to feel knowledge, not just to understand knowledge as something that is rational, but also understand knowledge as something that is effective, that you can feel, that you can experience. The third reason why I think that arts-based research matters is that it allows us to understand our subject positions as academics, our identities, as much more complex and potentially hybrid, where we can start combining subject positions, identities, and look at ourselves as a combination of, for instance, an artist and an academic. And Sinner has called that artademics. It's not the most beautiful word, but it sort of captures the idea. It allows us to think about ourselves as being academics and artist at the same time, where being an artist doesn't mean that you stop being an academic, and the other way around. Of course, this kind of hybridization requires deep respect for the different fields. You cannot instrumentalize the arts, as sometimes does happen, where you just bring in the logics from one field, the arts, and just use the arts without actually entering into the logics of the arts themselves. So there is something there to be careful with, but once you have achieved that level of sensitivity, then it does work quite well. And my final point, why art-based research matters, is that it allows us to reach more diversified audiences. Now, I'm not arguing that you can reach everybody with art-based research. That's not the point. But we can diversify our audiences. It produces wonderful experiences as a researcher, where you can actually organize an exhibition and talk to your visitors. You cannot do that when you're writing a book. You cannot go and sit next to your reader. I mean, it would be rather unhealthy if you tried. But in the case of an exhibition, you can actually communicate directly with visitors, talk about their experiences and how they actually interpret the knowledge production that you offer to them. And that, I think, is extremely precious, not just as a way to communicate knowledge, but also as a way to experience your own position in society as a knowledge producer. This wraps up my talk. So thank you very much for listening to me. Consider this an invitation to think about arts-based research. It's not an obligation. It's not something that we all have to do, but it's me sharing my experiences working with arts-based research and opening up for others to go through similar experiences if they desire so. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Nico. Thank you, Professor Karpentьер. And we really feel that EIMCR is supporting our topical seminar, not formally, but intellectually, and by your clear involvement. I'm not going to open the debate now, but still there are some comments on the chat. Please pay attention to these interesting remarks. I invite Denis Dунас, my colleague, who some time ago was my PhD student, but now is very independently flying his dancing his good research. Anyway, I am very happy to introduce Denis, who is definitely the leading researcher at the Faculty of Journalism, Moscow State University, and he is the associate professor at the Russian Academy of Education. His research interests are among in a very vast area, from anthropology, media anthropology, to media consumption and media socialization. And he is just finishing the grant from Russian Science Foundation given to him and his young colleagues as the promising emerging research school in the Russian science. Denis, please. And it's now 17:24.
Dear colleagues, thank you very much. First of all, I would like to thank the organizers, Professor Елена Vartanova and Dr. Anna Gladkova, for such a kind invitation and an opportunity to join this topical seminar. And of course, it is a great honor to have a presentation just right after Nikko Karpentьер, and I have absolutely no idea what to add after such a brilliant, wide and deep presentation, but maybe to focus on the Russian case, Russian context would be my point, what I really can to do in my presentation. So where I want to start is just to remind you the two notions which exist only in the Russian language, and in my opinion they are strongly related with the art. The first one is publicistica and the second one is intelligentsia. Publicistica is the definition which is related with the art of writing, and intelligentsia with the art of thinking. If we compare publicistica with a journalism text, of course, we might find many differences. First of all, publicistica is not just the text which informs about facts of social and political reality. Publicistica takes the methods of fiction writing, especially in the use of Russian language. And in these terms, publicistica becomes an art form that uses structures and instruments of Russian language as the main material of creation and the piece of art. Intelligentsia is also a very interesting phenomenon in Russian reality, because as Mikhail Katkov, the Russian publicist of the 19th century, mentioned, intelligentsia is those who combine both the scholarly talent and the artistic talent. This might explain why most of the Russian classical literature writers began their literature career from the publicistica, and why it is usually very difficult to create this borderline where the publicistica ends and the literature begins. The critical thinking, the liberal views, and the principal role in the Russian Revolution are probably the main features of intelligentsia and publicistica. Of course, if we compare the topics and we find another important factors of intelligentsia, we have to know that the division into Westernizers and Slavophiles is still relevant for the Russian ideology and Russian political system, but it was born in the 19th century. But of course, taking into account art as the approach which was formulated in media studies, we have to move further to the Soviet Union times and to see how the faculties of journalism were established in the Soviet time. It happened in 1940s, according to Stalin's decree, and the journalism education model was quite complicated because it consisted not just on the borrowing of Marxism, Leninism, theoretical approaches, but also in terms of quite diverse historical, sociological, and bourgeois approaches. But if we try to find the place of art in this Soviet journalism education model, so maybe the art of philology would be the answer at this question. And because of the high impact of two departments at the Faculty of Journalism, the Department of Russian Language and the Department of Russian Literature, who studied the Russian language and the publicistica texts, this method of art-based was realized. This is an interesting example how Professor Vladislav Kovalov was lecturing his Oblomov lecture, and his freedom of academic presentation is very interesting for the analysis, because actually, he didn't lecture, he played the role of Oblomov, and the audience and the room where he lectured was the real stage for him. Another interesting example is Lyudmila Tatarinova, who was lecturing the old literature. And during her lecture devoted to the work about the regiment of Igor, she played Yaroslavna's Lament. And she played it so artistically that she even shed her tears when she was Yaroslavna, and this crucial episode for the students was very artistically performed by her. Soviet television borrowed some art methods when it was analyzed by Russian researchers. And it is not surprisingly, because if we consider the timeline of the main TV programs appeared during the Soviet times, we might find out that many of these TV programs were closely related to the art, knowledge, science, and so on. So when Vladimir Sapak and other scholars who studied television have elaborated the TV theory during the Soviet times, of course, the main topics for them was to compare television as an art with other forms of art. For instance, television comparing with theater, cinema, and so on. And the main functions they distinguished were the function of cultural and education. The main form of this academic writing was, of course, monographs and students' books. Of course, the written academic text was dominating, but the publicistic experience was also very important, because many of the Soviet scholars have also been the active journalist or publicist. This is an interesting example how the television and the art demonstrated on the TV screen became a part of national consciousness. It happened in 1991 when the military struggle between the Mikhail Gorbachev and his opponents happened. And the only TV program which was demonstrated when the tanks entered Moscow was the ballet, the Swan Lake. And after this episode, the Swan Lake and the art on a TV is still considering like something very difficult for the Russian nation. If we look at the present situation and the academic processes of development in Russian media studies, we can observe that Russian media studies are very diverse. At the same time, they are still based on Soviet traditions, and philology line is still very important and dominant. This is the example of how diverse are the thematic lines of the first 20 post-Soviet years, and the art-based research might be found in literature-centric, cultural-centric, and others thematic lines. An interesting case how the scholars which now are very important for the Russian journalism theory are very free in their academic art and creativity, and how they correlate the journalism theory to the Russian philosophical and cultural heritage. For instance, Lazutina builds her journalism creativity theory according to Berdyaev's philosophy of creativity, and Karkanosenko relates it to the with the Russian 19th century publicistica. As to Svitic, she considers journalism closely related to the Vernadsky noosphere theory. What we can say about the perspectives of art-based research in Russia is that taking in account that Russian media studies are totally different, but still they are a crucial part of international process of academic development. We might notice that such influences of internationalization which face the Russian media studies today, like science metrics and so on, it might decrease the art and creativity among scholars, because such form as publicistica means that the scholar has his own right for free creation. But of course, science metrics is very strict in many of its forms. But what I am absolutely sure will support the art-based research is the journalism education itself. And first of all, because of the students and their project. These are the example of how different students, both in their in curricular and extracurricular activity, are very artistic. So that brings me to my final few points. Again and again, I want to say that art of writing and art of thinking is something which is related to the Russian cultural tradition, where journalism was considered as a literary work. And publicistica became the format of academic writing. This is, of course, is still the text. It's still the written text, but in the same time, it's different. It differs from the text, which is usually widespread in the science. Art and creativity and education keep on growing, and art and creativity in media is probably keep on decreasing. We also can notice that no other dominant forms of art and creativity beyond the academic written publicistica text can be explored at the moment in Russian media studies. Thank you very much for your interest and attention.
Thank you, Denis. And it was very interesting, a kind of different perspective, also exploring art and creativity. And I'm very happy to open, the debate, comments, and maybe questions. Please, colleagues, we have 20 minutes for the discussion. I haven't seen actually any questions in the chat box, which doesn't mean that you are thinking of what to ask. And maybe we can start. There is a question from Ivan, who is our younger colleague at the international office. And this is a kind of general question for the discussion. Can art-based methods generate scientific knowledge that predict our experience? Or is it designed just to explore and express your own worldview and your own way of feeling the world? If so, is it different from art? So maybe, Nico, you start, and if Denis has any additions to this, please. Nico, the floor is yours.
Thank you for probably the most difficult question you could ask, because there are endless answers to that. I think what distinguishes arts-based research from the arts is that it still has a very clear academic ground. So it does not aim to speak from an individual perspective. It actually aims to produce and communicate academic knowledge. So that's the principle. We can argue if it works or whether it doesn't work, but the main principle is that it wants to move beyond individual experiences. Now, for a very quick addition to that, I think that not all academic research actually necessarily moves beyond the individual experience anyway. If you read a lot of theory, you might recognize very deeply individual experiences that are cloaked as theory, but maybe we shouldn't be too picky and too critical immediately. But what I would sort of add is that we should maybe be careful creating dichotomies here. But the objective of arts-based research is to actually produce and communicate academic knowledge. It's very much part of an academic project, and it clearly differentiates itself from artistic work and even from artistic research, which is seen as part of the field of the arts. In that sense, arts-based research is seen as a hybrid, as a model that moves into two fields, an academic field and an artistic field at the same time. So that's the general answer, but thank you for a fairly impossible question.
Thank you. Denis, are you ready to add something?
Yes, maybe just very briefly, I can add that for sure, knowledge and science has its limitations in research of the world and the contemporary society. So if we combine the traditional methods of science with new, such as feelings or performance, I think it will be very interesting practices for our science in general.
Yeah, very interesting approach. And I think that there is one point where the academia and art may be linked or may cross. And this would be like the intuition of a researcher and the intuition of a creator. Maybe we can also think of this. But there is a wonderful question from Ilka Sevgi. This is in a chat box, and please prepare your answer while I'm reading this. And the colleague asks the speakers to share their ideas about censorship and ideas about the case of Julian Assange. Nico and then Denis.
I think I was reading a different question, so maybe the question went to you only, because what I have is the digital instruments question.
I see it. I see it after Ivan's.
Okay.
Right after.
I found it.
About censorship and the case of Julian Assange, which is.
I'm not sure if Assange interventions are artistic. But,
Yeah.
I think this opens a totally different debate, which is extremely important at the same time. And I have one of my PhD students who's, I think, one of the most strong defenders of Assange work, and actually becoming an academic activist in dealing with Assange. I usually end up sort of trying to convince her to talk a bit more about her PhD project and about Assange. But I think this is a vital topic, but at the same time an extremely difficult discussion. What Assange has shown in his activist way is that obviously transparency can play a vital role. And I think it's especially some of the incidents that we saw, in particular the helicopter shooting, were vital to circulate. So I think that here, what we see, and two quick comments, but I think it's a bit outside the topic of this talk, two quick comments, is that transparency has proven to be extremely vital, because in some cases we've seen information that is important to have being covered up. Secondly, it opens all sorts of questions on operational security, etc., which I understand and appreciate, but I think that here, in many cases, the greater good argument prevails. The second is that I think in the way that we relate to Assange, and that was the example of my PhD student, it clearly also shows that some of us can also use more hybrid identities related to activism. And it is perfectly possible to even combine what I sometimes call the AAA model, combine artistic, activist, and academic approaches into one hybrid identity. So I think that it does raise issues that are connected, but much more connected to what one could say can think about in relationship to hybrid subject positions. But it's a bit of a, it's a bit of a question that was slightly outside the topic, I would argue.
On the other hand, you made a very deep and interesting answer, and we have to think of this. There are questions coming still to the chat box, and Daniel asking about how art-based methods can be presented in digital sphere, and maybe we can take the question from Raya Arslan, who is asking what would be the methodologies of art-based research, and can we apply traditional media studies theories in art-based research? And then I'll go back to question addressed to Dennis. Nico?
Okay, quickly, I think that the entire range of artistic repertoires are available to use in arts-based research, which also means that what has been done in the digital arts can be used to inspire and to communicate academic research. So that's like the full range is available. What you actually see in particular in discussions in writing studies, so in composition studies, when they talk about moving beyond the written text, it often actually immediately goes into the digital, where new ways of writing are being used to experiment with the combination of the audiovisual, the written text in an online environment. So that's in composition studies, that's one of the key areas where you find these debates. I think the other question is sort of the opposite, in the sense that once you've sort of thought through your theoretical framework, the question becomes, how do I symbolize that? To put it really simple, is how can I then translate this into a piece of art? And how can I, in other words, translate theory into an artistic intervention? And what I was trying to do with the Mirror Palace of Democracy was actually to translate a democratic theory, a reflection about democratic contingency, and reflect that into a mirror palace, which was a piece of installation art. My argument would be is that you can do that in exactly the same way with media theory. The challenge would be is that look at the particular media theory. How can you communicate and think about that theoretical framework if you would use an artistic repertoire? And that is, I think, the question that I want to raise. And my challenge to maybe all of you is, if you try to do that, then what you will discover is new theory. Not just new communication, but you will discover limits to your theoretical thinking that you can then use to further enhance and develop these theoretical frameworks. That would be, I think, the prediction that I would dare to make.
Thank you, Nico. This is very interesting. We all, in a way, nowadays perform our research through the celebrity approach, celebrity studies being the stars of the Zoom translations. However, there are very many important questions to Dennis and from Shahla and Dennis, please, you'll start with these. There is, I draw your attention to the chat box and to the discussion points of Glenn and Gaia and Apollinaria addresses her question to Denis and also Nico. And there is Elira raising hand through the instruments of Zoom. So perhaps the questions for this would be enough. Please, speakers, respond to questions. Denis, to two questions, then question by Elira, and comments to the debate in the chat box. Please.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I think that the comment from Pakistan is probably just a comment, maybe not a question. So thank you, and again, we will be happy to see you in Moscow. As for the other question, the question of Apollinaria, I think that digital technologies have already become a part of educational process. So maybe the focus on art is still lacking, but it's all because of it's a new area of research, and of course it's a new area of study, but I think it will keep on growing. And so I think these are the all questions for me. Maybe Nico will continue answering the others' comments.
I think we should ask Elira, who raised her hand, to talk, and then maybe you comment on the debates in the chat box as a concluding part of the seminar. Elira, please, the floor is yours.
Hi, thank you very much. It's a really mind-opening and really new perspective for me. Art-based research and participatory research. I mean, this art-based research itself is a participatory research involving engaging and also sharing your experience with academicians. And my question is, it is a cultural specific. In different cultures, art also is different. So what about this cultural relativism? And for example, our culture in Central Asia is a nomadic culture, where nomads or semi-nomads, like in Mongolia, they live in peace with nature, and they are like shamans praying nature, and also oral history. This Manas epic is the biggest epic, 11 volumes, and our storytellers, they tell this, they produce knowledge themselves right away, directly. So there are 12 volumes of these heroic actions, etc. So how it is like cultural and oral history, oral epic, this kind of, is it also knowledge production? And you mentioned dance in your PhD thesis or dissertation. So dance also was a part of culture of shamans and nomads. So they were expressing themselves through dance also. So knowledge production, is it also kind of participatory and engaging, and also it's not theory related, but what about this kind of I mean indigenous cultural perspective?
Thank you very much. I also see that our colleague Touchman raised his hand. Please ask your question, and then we'll give the floor to the final concluding words of our speakers. Yes, please.
Yeah, oh, I'm sorry. It's Tuckman. I'm having a little trouble. I love expression through art, and one can see it in academic expression going fairly far back. But what worries me is that we're talking about expanding modes of academic expression during a period, including the present use of digital media to teach, but during a period when academic freedom itself is becoming more limited, at least in my country. And I just would like to hear people expand on this seeming contradiction.
Please, there are some open questions in the chat box. Maybe you conclude in 2 minutes, each of you.
Okay, I'll be short. Gay, thanks for a brilliant question. I saw it come in the chat, so I had at least 3 seconds to think about it. But in a way, I think I can also connect some of my answers with Elira and her question. Obviously, yes, I think that there is considerable pressure on academia, and yes, we need to resist that. I think that what I am also trying to advocate for is one of the strategies of resistance is to start thinking about some of the straitjackets we have created for ourselves and try to move outside them. I think that's my point. Is this the only way to resist against these unacceptable pressures? No, clearly not. This would be only one of the many strategies, and I would argue that we need also more activist and more political strategies. As academics, we need to defend our position much more clearly, much more explicitly. So I don't see this as an either or. I see this as one of the ways of, say, opening up the straitjackets that we have created for ourselves, but not the only one. And in that sense, I think engaging in alliances is crucial. What we have been doing is we've sort of folded back onto our own position. My argument is partially also to organize dialogues, collaborations with artists, but also with activists, so that we can cope with some of these pressures and actually be better academics. And I think that brings me, I'm sorry for being so quick, but yeah, time is what it is. It brings me to Elira, because I think that also as academics, engaging in dialogues with indigenous people, with people that have very different lifestyles is incredibly precious. And I think that it's not only a matter of studying nomadic lifestyles, it's a matter of learning from nomadic lifestyles and, for instance, accepting some of the communicative tools that they have been developing that we can actually use, but we can also engage in participatory collaborations where we can produce knowledge together. We've often seen the university as an exclusive place of knowledge production, which I don't think is the best way to look at society. We are a privileged location of knowledge production, but not the only one. We should reach out to other parts of society where there's also being knowledge produced and engage in dialogues so that we can actually understand the world better through these forms of dialogical knowledge production. And that's where I think your story kicks in and is absolutely vital. So that's my comments, apart from thank you for the brilliant questions. And the floor is to Dennis, who did actually a great presentation. I really took a lot home from that. So thank you, Dennis. Now that I can speak, I should say thank you too.
What I can add maybe is just that we live in really in a very interesting times, and everything is changing, everything is transforming, and but I do believe that all the transformations and all the changes are changing for better. And it means that all the new approaches, all the methods we face, we investigate, we explore, they are maybe new, and we can have some fear about it. But I think in general and in common, it anyway will improve our lives, and anyway it will change our research for better.
Thank you, Nico and Dennis. Thank you, all participants. Unfortunately, some minor points of your questions or some major points of your questions were left without response, but I hope that next time you may continue asking questions from our speakers. We plan our next topical seminar, the third one, which would be really an important step in promoting our topical seminar, for the 4th of May. And the speakers for this seminar would be also very interesting people and important for all of us and for all of us here in Moscow. It's Mark Doze from the University of Amsterdam and Anna Gladkova from the Faculty of Journalism, Moscow State University. These two guys would be talking about something very important, but I still don't know their topics. Follow the information, follow the announcements, and please join us. We hope to make our academic community stronger, more intellectual, and more devoted to each other through these topical seminars. 1 hour is past, and I think it's time to stop for today. We continue next first Tuesday in May. Thank you all.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you for holding this discussion.